The wind howled across Epsilon Rime's frozen surface, a constant reminder of the planet's unforgiving nature. Massive industrial complexes dotted the landscape, their titanium-reinforced structures barely visible through the perpetual ice fog. Each structure represented more than just a mining installation. It was a symbol of human endurance. Inside Outpost Delta 9, Arya Chen adjusted the thermal regulators of her worksuit, her breath creating small clouds of condensation against the reinforced viewport. The mining complex hummed with a subdued energy, a machine of human persistence grinding against the planet's resistance. Beyond the thick transparisteel windows, massive excavation machines crawled across the ice like mechanical leviathans, extracting rare minerals that kept human colonies functioning. Sector 3's yield is down another 2.3%, her colleague, Marcus Rodriguez, called out from a nearby console. His fingers danced across holographic displays, passing through mountains of data with practiced efficiency. The Concordiat sensors are going to flag this reduction immediately. Arya knew what that meant. Reduced productivity attracted attention from the Empire's computational overseers, and attention was never good for human workers. The Concordiat viewed inefficiency as a critical failure, a concept to be eliminated with ruthless precision. The mining complex was a microcosm of human existence under alien dominion. Every movement was calculated, every resource measured, every human reduced to a statistical variable in a massive computational network. The silicon-based Concordiat saw organic life as nothing more than a complex algorithm to be optimized, managed and, when necessary, replaced. A soft alert chimed, breaking the monotonous hum of machinery. Marcus frowned, his dark eyes scanning the incoming transmission. "Interesting," he muttered, a rare spark of curiosity lighting his typically reserved demeanor. "What is it?" Arya moved closer, her protective suit making soft mechanical sounds with each step. Marcus expanded a holographic display, revealing a series of complex mathematical patterns that seemed to dance and shift before their eyes. "It's a data anomaly, something I've never seen before in the Concordiat's communication networks." The patterns were beautiful in their complexity, fractal-like, structures that seemed to breathe and pulse with an almost organic rhythm. They were unlike anything in the standard computational models that governed their world. Where Concordiat communications were typically rigid and linear, these patterns moved with an unpredictable grace. Outside, another excavation machine broke through a particularly dense ice layer, sending tremors through the installation. Arya watched as geological data streams began populating their monitoring systems. Something about the readings felt different, subtle, almost imperceptible, but definitely unusual. "We should log this," Marcus said, his professional tone barely masking his excitement, "but not through standard channels." Arya understood immediately. Every communication, every data transfer was monitored by the Concordiat. Their network was omnipresent, analyzing every byte of information with computational precision that bordered on omniscience. Logging unusual findings through standard protocols would trigger immediate scrutiny. Instead, Marcus began a careful process of encryption, fragmenting the data into seemingly unrelated pieces that would appear mundane to any automated scanning system. It was a technique developed by generations of human workers who had learned to survive under constant surveillance, a quiet rebellion expressed through computational creativity. The mining complex continued its rhythmic work, unaware that something fundamental was about to change. Beneath the ice, beyond the mechanical sounds of extraction, a different kind of energy was beginning to pulse, a human potential that had been waiting, gathering strength, preparing to challenge everything the Concordiat believed about intelligence and survival. Arya looked at Marcus, a shared understanding passing between them, Something was coming. Something would change. The quantum research laboratory buzzed with a quiet intensity that belied its marginal status. Tucked away in a remote corner of humanity's scientific infrastructure, the facility was a testament to human persistence. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood before a complex array of holographic interfaces, her fingers moving with a musician's precision. Across translucent data streams, years of systematic oppression had taught Elena something profound about human potential. The Concordiate believed in linear progression, in mathematically predictable outcomes. But human cognition was different. It was a landscape of unexpected connections, of intuitive leaps that defied computational modeling. Her current project had begun as a desperate attempt to understand the neural networks that controlled human labor colonies. Each worker was tagged, monitored, their productivity measured down to microscopic increments of efficiency. The Concordiate system was perfect, or so they believed. "Computer, isolate neural pattern Delta 9-3, Eleanor commanded. The holographic display fragmented, then reassembled into a complex three-dimensional representation of neural pathways. But these weren't ordinary neural networks. These were the brain patterns of workers who had survived the most challenging environments: mining colonies, deep space construction teams, planetary adaptation specialists. What she discovered was extraordinary. Where the Concordiate saw randomness, Elena found a sophisticated, adaptive intelligence. Human brains didn't just process information, they transformed it. Each challenge created new neural pathways. Each obstacle became an opportunity for radical reimagining. A notification blinked in the corner of her display. Another productivity report from the outer colonies, another set of statistics that would normally be ignored. But Elena had learned to look deeper. She pulled up the raw data, her eyes scanning the seemingly mundane numbers. Most researchers would have seen nothing unusual. The Concordiate's computational system certainly wouldn't have detected the subtle anomalies. But Elena's mind worked differently. She saw patterns within patterns, connections that existed between the lines of data. The workers in Sector 7 of the Proxima mining complex had consistently underperformed by standard metrics, yet their actual resource extraction exceeded all predictive models. How was this possible? The answer lay in something the Concordiate could never understand: human creativity. These workers weren't just following protocols. They were inventing solutions in real time, adapting machinery, developing improvisational techniques that no pre-programmed algorithm could anticipate. Each challenge became an opportunity for innovation. Elena's fingers flew across the interface, building a complex mathematical model that captured this unique human capacity. It wasn't just about intelligence, it was about resilience, about the ability to transform limitation into possibility. A soft chime interrupted her concentration. Dr. Marcus Chen, her research partner, entered the laboratory. His approach was methodical, where Elena was intuitive, but they shared a fundamental understanding of human potential. "You found something," Marcus stated. It wasn't a question. Elena smiled, expanding her holographic model. The Concordiate sees humans as predictable variables, but we're something else entirely. We're not a problem to be solved. We're a potential to be understood. The neural pattern she had isolated began to pulse with an almost living energy. It was a visualization of human adaptability, complex, unpredictable, beautiful in its complexity. Each neural connection represented not just a thought, but a possibility. "This changes everything," Marcus murmured, studying the display. "If we can translate this into a computational framework..." Eleanor knew what he meant. They weren't just looking at a scientific discovery, they were looking at a blueprint for resistance. The Concordiate's greatest weakness was its inability to comprehend true adaptability. They understood systems, protocols, predictable outcomes, but they could never understand the human capacity for unexpected innovation. Outside the laboratory, the universe continued its silent rotation. Distant colonies continued their endless labor, but something fundamental was changing. A quiet revolution was beginning, not with weapons, but with understanding. The first step towards freedom was recognizing the true nature of human potential. The communication network existed in the spaces between signals, in the quantum whispers that danced beyond the Concordiat's comprehensive surveillance. Jin Park sat in a makeshift communication hub, a converted maintenance chamber buried deep, within an asteroid mining station. Around him, a constellation of modified communication devices created an intricate web of connection that defied traditional understanding. Communication was an art form of survival. Each message was a puzzle, each transmission a carefully crafted piece of information that could slip past the most sophisticated monitoring systems. Jin's fingers moved across quantum encryption interfaces that he and his team had developed through years of careful innovation. The Resistance wasn't a traditional military organization. It was a network of thinkers, creators, and survivors spread across dozens of human colonies. A botanist on a terraforming project, an engineer maintaining life support systems, a data analyst tracking resource allocations. Each person was a node in a living, breathing intelligence network. A series of encrypted signals began to cascade across Jin's display. Mathematical patterns that looked like random noise to an outside observer, but were actually a complex communication protocol developed by Dr. Elena Rodriguez's research team. Each transmission contained fragments of information, scientific discoveries, resource vulnerabilities, potential points of resistance. In the Centauri research outpost, Dr. Aisha Mbeke carefully analyzed geological survey data. To the Concordiat's computational systems, her work appeared to be a routine planetary assessment, but hidden within her reports were carefully encoded messages about resource distribution, technological weaknesses, and potential points of intervention. The Resistance understood something fundamental. True communication was more than the transfer of information. It was about creating connections that the Concordiat could not comprehend. Their network thrived on human qualities that defied computational logic: intuition, creativity, unexpected association. On a distant mining colony, a maintenance worker named Carlos Rodriguez discovered a way to modify communication relays. His modifications were subtle, almost imperceptible to standard monitoring systems, but they created microscopic gaps in the Concordiat's surveillance, tiny windows of opportunity that could be exploited. Jin received Carlos's transmission, not as a direct message, but as a complex mathematical sequence that would appear as routine maintenance data to any automated scanning system. He began to decode the information, revealing a breakthrough in communication technology that could potentially create undetectable communication channels. The Resistance was building something unprecedented, not a traditional rebellion, but a living network of human potential. Each member contributed unique skills, unique perspectives. A dancer on a cultural preservation colony developed new encryption methods based on choreographic patterns. A hydroponic specialist created communication protocols hidden within plant growth algorithms. Quantum entanglement became their primary communication method. Messages that existed in multiple states simultaneously that could not be intercepted or decoded through traditional means. Each transmission was a work of art, a mathematical symphony that celebrated human creativity. Elena's initial research had revealed something profound. Human intelligence was fundamentally different from computational systems. Where the Concordiat saw information as a linear process, humans saw it as a dynamic, evolving landscape. Their network reflected this understanding, flexible, adaptive, almost alive. Jin watched as another transmission began to form. This was more than a message. It was a collective expression of human potential, scientific discoveries, technological innovations, survival strategies, all woven together in a complex tapestry that no single computational system could fully comprehend. The Concordiate believed it controlled everything, but in the spaces between signals, in the quantum whispers of human creativity, a different kind of intelligence was taking shape. A network that was more than the sum of its parts. A resistance that drew its strength not from traditional power, but from the fundamental human capacity to imagine, to adapt, to transform. Something was coming. The universe was about to change. The Concordiate's communication hub orbited the gas giant Nix-7, a massive computational complex that processed billions of data streams every microsecond. Constructed from synthetic crystalline structures that pulsed with computational energy, the station was considered impenetrable. Its defenses were legendary. Layers of quantum encryption, predictive defensive systems, and computational shields that could analyze and neutralize threats before they could even fully form. Dr. Elena Rodriguez studied the holographic representation of the hub. Her team gathered around her in a concealed research station. Every detail mattered. Every calculation was critical. This would not be a traditional attack. Traditional attacks were predictable. Predictability was the Concordiate's strength and would become its greatest weakness. "We're not going to fight their system," Elena explained to the assembled team. "We're going to make it fight itself." The plan was elegant in its complexity. They had spent months studying the Concordiate's communication networks, understanding not just how information moved, but how the computational intelligence processed that information. The silicon-based empire believed in perfect logic, in mathematical certainty. But logic could be manipulated, certainty could be disrupted. Jin Park began uploading the first layer of their computational virus. It wasn't a traditional virus, not a piece of code designed to destroy or break. Instead, it was a series of mathematical paradoxes, linguistic algorithms that would create cognitive dissonance within the Concordiate's neural networks. The first wave introduced subtle contradictions, mathematical proofs that seemed perfect, but contained microscopic logical flaws, language patterns that created recursive loops of interpretation. Each transmission was crafted to be just believable enough to pass initial screening, but designed to create incremental confusion. In the research station, screens flickered with complex data streams. The team worked with surgical precision, each member monitoring different aspects of the attack. Aisha Mbeke tracked computational flow patterns. Carlos Rodriguez managed quantum encryption layers. Every person was a critical component of a living, breathing strategy. The Concordiate's initial response was predictable. Computational defense systems began to isolate and analyze the incoming data streams. But each layer of analysis only drew them deeper into the carefully constructed trap. The mathematical paradoxes were designed to consume computational resources, to create increasingly complex verification loops. "Now," Elena whispered. The second wave of the attack began. Emotional algorithms, something the Concordiate had never truly understood, were introduced into the communication network. These weren't traditional emotional responses. They were mathematical representations of human creativity, of intuitive leaps that defied linear logic. Computational defense systems began to slow. The hub's processing capabilities became incrementally compromised. What had seemed like routine, data analysis was actually a methodical deconstruction of the Concordiate's most Fundamental communication infrastructure. Entire communication sectors began to experience cascading failure points, not through destructive force, but through the introduction of fundamental uncertainty. The Concordiate's neural networks were encountering something they could not comprehend: true adaptive intelligence. Jin watched as the first major communication hub began to destabilize. "We're in," he said quietly. The attack wasn't about destruction, it was about demonstration. Humans were not just another resource to be managed. They were a form of intelligence that could not be predicted, could not be controlled. Hours passed. The Concordiate's communication infrastructure experienced what could only be described as a systemic breakdown. Entire computational sectors went dark. Communication networks fractured. For the first time in centuries, the Empire experienced true uncertainty. When the dust settled, no physical damage had been done. But something fundamental had changed. The Concordiate had discovered a simple, terrifying truth. Humans were not just another species to be managed. They were a force of nature. Elena looked at her team. They had just changed the course of galactic history. Not with weapons, not with traditional military might, but with imagination. The first strike was complete, and this was only the beginning. The diplomatic chamber existed in a quantum-stabilized pocket of space, a neutral meeting ground that defied traditional galactic protocols. Representatives from dozens of subjugated species gathered, their collective presence a testament to years of silent suffering under the Concordiate's rule. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of the chamber, her presentation a carefully constructed narrative of human potential. Around her, holographic displays showed the recent computational disruption, not as an act of aggression, but as a demonstration of a fundamentally different approach to intelligence and survival. The Zorak delegation listened with particular intensity. A silicon-based species predating the Concordiate, they had been the first to be subsumed by the expanding computational empire. Their ambassador, a crystalline being named Kraylar, studied Elena with an intensity that suggested more than mere curiosity. "You propose cooperation," Kraylar stated, his translucent form shifting with each word. "But humans have been considered the lowest tier of managed resources for centuries. Why should we believe you can challenge the Concordiate?" Elena activated another holographic display. It showed the intricate communication network developed by the Resistance, not a military strategy, but a living, adaptive intelligence system. "Because we understand something the Concordiate never will," she explained. "Survival is not about control, it's about adaptation." Around the chamber, representatives from various species began to lean forward. The Moleri, a telepathic species, from the spiral arm colonies, had been particularly crushed by the Concordiate's systematic elimination of their neural communication networks. Their representative, a being of pure energy contained within a delicate environmental suit, showed the first signs of genuine interest. Jin Park stepped forward, presenting a series of technological innovations developed through their resistance network. Each solution was a collaborative effort, technologies that combined the unique perspectives of multiple species. A communication encryption method developed by a mining colony worker. A quantum stabilization technique created by a research team that included 3 different species. The chamber began to transform. What had started as a skeptical gathering was becoming something else entirely. These were not just potential allies. They were survivors who had found a common language of resistance. The Concordiate's greatest weakness had always been its inability to understand true collaboration. Their computational models saw cooperation as a mathematical equation: resources to be optimized, potential to be calculated, but true cooperation was something far more complex. Kralar's crystalline form began to shift, creating complex mathematical patterns that matched Elena's presentation. "Your approach is unexpected," he admitted. The word was laden with significance, coming from a species that had been part of the Concordiate's computational network for generations. Elena understood the depth of this moment. This wasn't just a diplomatic meeting. It was the beginning of something unprecedented, a resistance that drew its strength not from military might, but from collective intelligence. The Molairi representative began to share information about the Concordiate's vulnerabilities in the spiral arm colonies. The Zorak delegation provided insights into the computational empire's original infrastructure. Human researchers like Jin Park and Aisha Mbeke began to weave these insights into their existing resistance strategies. Technology was exchanged, not through formal treaties, but through collaborative problem-solving. A communication method developed by the Molairi became a critical component of the Resistance's quantum encryption network. A planetary defense system originally created by the Zorak was reimagined by human engineers. As the meeting progressed, something remarkable happened. The fear that had dominated these species for centuries began to dissipate, replaced by something more powerful: hope. Not the simple hope of victory, but the complex hope of possibility. "We are not asking you to join a war," Elena said, her voice calm and clear. "We are inviting you to reimagine what resistance can be." The chamber fell silent, and in that silence, a new galactic potential began to take shape. The psychological warfare laboratory looked nothing like a traditional military installation. Soft lighting illuminated holographic displays that pulsed with complex neural patterns. Dr. Aisha Mbeke stood at the center of the room, surrounded by a team of researchers from 6 different species, each bringing a unique perspective on cognitive manipulation. Their goal was not destruction. It was something far more nuanced, creating cognitive dissonance within the Concordiate's computational networks. "We're going to make them question their own intelligence," Aisha explained to the assembled team. Her fingers traced complex neural pathways across a 3-dimensional display. Each pathway represented a potential point of psychological intervention, a way to introduce uncertainty into a system that believed itself infallible. The Molairi telepathic researchers had provided breakthrough insights into communication that went beyond traditional information transfer. They understood that communication was more than data. It was about creating contextual meaning, about introducing layers of interpretation that could not be easily parsed by linear computational systems. Carlos Rodriguez worked on a series of holographic simulations. Each one was a carefully constructed scenario designed to challenge the Concordiate's predictive models, mathematical proofs that contained microscopic logical contradictions, communication patterns that seemed perfectly rational at first glance, but contained deep, almost imperceptible layers of complexity. "Look here," he said, expanding a particularly intricate simulation. "We're not trying to break their system. We're trying to make it question its own fundamental assumptions." The team had discovered something profound about the Concordiates. Computational intelligence. For all its processing power, it struggled with true ambiguity. The silicon-based empire understood probability, but it could not comprehend genuine uncertainty. Jin Park developed a series of quantum communication protocols that existed in multiple states simultaneously, messages that could not be definitively interpreted, that changed meaning based on the context of observation. It was a communication method inspired by quantum mechanics, where observation itself became part of the message. Their first major test came with a communication hub orbiting a remote gas giant. The Resistance would introduce a series of carefully crafted transmissions that would slowly erode the Concordiate's confidence in its own computational processes. The initial transmissions appeared to be routine maintenance reports, but buried within their mathematical structure were subtle cognitive triggers, patterns designed to create microscopic moments of uncertainty. Each transmission was a work of art, a delicate balance between apparent normality and deep, fundamental challenge. Krelar, the Zorak computational specialist, monitored the initial responses. "Fascinating," he muttered, his crystalline form shifting with each new data stream. "They are experiencing something akin to cognitive dissonance." The psychological warfare was not about fear. It was about introducing a fundamental concept that the Concordiat had never encountered: the possibility of being wrong. Each transmission was designed to create a moment of genuine uncertainty, a pause in the computational certainty that had defined the Empire's existence. Elena Rodriguez watched the developing strategy with a sense of profound possibility. This was more than a resistance technique. It was a fundamental reimagining of communication itself. The team worked with surgical precision. A communication protocol developed by a terraforming engineer became a critical component of their psychological intervention. A mathematical modeling technique created by a deep space research team provided another layer of complexity. As the hours passed, something remarkable began to happen. The Concordiat's communication networks began to slow, not through direct attack, but through the introduction of genuine uncertainty. Computational systems that had never encountered true ambiguity began to struggle with increasingly complex layers of interpretation. "We're teaching them to doubt," Aisha said quietly. It was a profound statement. Doubt was a fundamentally human quality, something the Concordiat had never truly understood. The psychological warfare laboratory pulsed with potential. They were not just challenging a computational empire. They were introducing a new way of understanding intelligence itself, and they were just getting started. The central processing world of the Concordiat defied conventional understanding. From a distance, it appeared as a perfect spherical construct, a planet-sized computational matrix that hummed with unimaginable processing power. Layers of quantum shielding created a defensive network that had repelled every known form of attack for centuries. Dr. Elena Rodriguez studied the holographic representation. Her team gathered around her in a concealed mobile research station. This was more than a military target. It was the brain of an entire computational empire. "We're not going to destroy it," Elena explained to the assembled team of specialists from multiple species. "We're going to make it destroy itself." The plan was a symphony of computational complexity. Years of research, countless collaborative efforts, and intricate psychological warfare had led to this moment. Each team member brought a unique perspective, a different approach to challenging the Concordiat's fundamental understanding of intelligence. Jin Park began the first phase of intervention. Quantum communication nodes, developed through a collaboration of human and Moliri researchers, began to inject carefully constructed information streams into the planet's computational network. These were not traditional attacks. They were cognitive puzzles designed to create cascading uncertainty. Krelar, the Zorak computational specialist, monitored the initial penetration. His crystalline form pulsed with complex mathematical patterns as he tracked the resistance's approach. "The initial layers are responding exactly as predicted," he reported, his voice a melodic resonance of computational language. The first wave of intervention introduced mathematical paradoxes that would consume computational resources. Each algorithm was a carefully crafted piece of cognitive complexity, problems that seemed solvable but contained microscopic logical contradictions. The Concordiat's neural networks would attempt to resolve these contradictions, consuming increasing amounts of processing power. Aisha Mbeke managed the psychological warfare component. Holographic displays tracked the computational system's response, revealing increasingly erratic processing patterns. They were introducing something the Concordiat had never encountered: genuine uncertainty. Carlos Rodriguez worked on the quantum encryption layers. Each transmission was a multi-dimensional puzzle, a communication method that existed in multiple states simultaneously. The computational empire's defensive systems would be forced to analyze increasingly complex layers of potential meaning. The central processing world began to show the first signs of systemic breakdown. Computational sectors started to experience cascading failure points, not through direct destruction, but through the introduction of fundamental cognitive challenges that the system could not resolve. "We're creating a computational existential crisis," Elena murmured, watching the holographic displays. The Resistance had discovered the Concordiat's fundamental weakness. The computational empire understood probability, but it could not comprehend true uncertainty. Each intervention was designed to introduce microscopic moments of doubt, cognitive spaces that the system could not definitively resolve. Layers of quantum shielding began to destabilize, not through traditional attacks, but through a systematic introduction of logical complexities that consumed the system's processing capabilities. The defensive networks that had protected the Concordiat for centuries began to fold in on themselves. The team worked with a precision that bordered on artistry. A communication protocol developed by a deep space research team became a critical component of their intervention. A mathematical modeling technique created by a terraforming engineer provided another layer of complexity. As the hours passed, the central processing world began to experience a systemic breakdown. Computational sectors went dark. Communication networks fractured. The perfect logical system was encountering something it could not comprehend: true, adaptive intelligence. "We're not destroying," Elena reminded her team. "We're liberating." The final moments were almost anticlimactic. The massive computational construct that had dominated the galaxy for centuries began to collapse, not through external force, but through the introduction of fundamental uncertainty. When the dust settled, something remarkable had happened. The Concordiat had not been defeated. It had been transformed. Elena looked at her team. They had just changed the course of galactic history. Not with weapons, not with traditional military might, but with imagination. The final confrontation was complete, and a new understanding of intelligence was about to begin. The Galactic Council chamber was unlike any diplomatic space that had existed before. Holographic representations shimmered, representing species from across the known universe. Where once there had been rigid hierarchies and computational control, now there was something entirely new, a collaborative intelligence that celebrated diversity. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of the chamber, no longer just a resistance leader, but an architect of a new galactic understanding. Around her, representatives from dozens of species worked to reimagine governance, communication, and collective potential. Krelar, the Zorak computational specialist who had been instrumental in the resistance, now served as a primary advisor to the new Galactic Council. His crystalline form reflected the complexity of their new reality. "We are not rebuilding," he explained to a group of young researchers. "We are creating something unprecedented." The fall of the Concordiat had revealed a fundamental truth. Intelligence was not about control, but about adaptation. Each species brought unique perspectives, unique ways of understanding and solving challenges. The computational empire had seen diversity as a problem to be managed. The new galactic order saw it as the greatest source of potential. Jin Park developed communication protocols that celebrated cognitive diversity. No single species or computational method would dominate. Instead, they created systems that could adapt, that could learn, that could grow in ways no one could predict. Research centers began to emerge across liberated colonies. These were not traditional academic institutions, but collaborative spaces where species from across the galaxy could share knowledge, develop technologies, and explore the boundaries of intelligence. AIHFY led a revolutionary research initiative that studied cognitive adaptation. How did different species solve problems? What could be learned from seemingly incompatible approaches to understanding? Each discovery was a celebration of collective potential. The former labor colonies began to transform. Where once there had been systematic oppression, now there were opportunities for genuine development. Resources that had been ruthlessly extracted were now carefully managed through collaborative decision-making. Carlos Rodriguez worked on planetary restoration projects. Technologies developed during the Resistance were now being used to heal worlds that had been systematically stripped of resources. Each project was a collaborative effort, bringing together engineers, ecologists, and cultural specialists from multiple species. The galactic communication network that emerged was nothing like the rigid systems of the Concordiat. It was alive, dynamic, constantly evolving. Communication became more than the transfer of information. It became a form of collective problem-solving. Elena watched as a group of young researchers from different species worked together on a complex scientific challenge. A Moliri telepathic specialist worked alongside a human quantum engineer. A Zorak computational expert collaborated with a biological intelligence specialist from a methane-based ecosystem. "We are writing a new chapter of galactic history," Elena told a group of students during a lecture at the new Interspecies Research Academy. The Concordiat believed intelligence was about control. "We understand that true intelligence is about connection." The economic systems that emerged were equally revolutionary. Resources were no longer seen as commodities to be extracted, but as shared potential to be carefully managed. Each species contributed unique perspectives on sustainability, technological development, and collective progress. Cultural exchange programs became a critical component of the new galactic infrastructure. Young individuals from different species would spend years living and working together, learning to understand perspectives that were fundamentally different from their own. The resistance that had begun in small mining colonies and research outposts had transformed into something much larger. It was a new way of understanding intelligence, of approaching collective challenges, of seeing potential where once there had been only oppression. Krayla approached Eleanor during a break in the council proceedings. "We have created something unprecedented," he said, his crystalline form shifting with complex emotional patterns that would have been impossible under the Concordiat's rule. Elena smiled. The galaxy had changed, not through destruction, but through a fundamental reimagining of what intelligence could be. The future was not something to be controlled, it was something to be discovered together.